Shikues ndëruar, mirëmbrëma, jemi këtu me ambasadorin Criss Dell. Ambassador, welcome to Jeta in Kosove.
Thank you, and congratulations, Jeta, by the way, on your baby.
Thank you very much. Can we start by asking you, is Kosovo in an institutional crisis, or is this a start of a new era for Kosovo?
I think it's the start of a new era. I think the events of the last, let's say, 72 hours could well have caused a real institutional crisis here. But the institutions of Kosovo, the Constitutional Court, the former president, I think they acquitted themselves with enormous dignity. They put the interests of the nation ahead of their own personal or political interest, in the case of the president, with a very noble and dignified act. As I said to him, I thought that his decision to honor the will of the court only justified the decision that had been taken several years ago to appoint him to the highest office in the land in any case. It justified the wisdom of that decision in the first place, and I think it speaks very, very highly of the man that he put the good of his country in first place. You know, these are critically important times for Kosovo. Everything we do now creates a precedent for the future. The decisions taken in the last couple of days are going to have a lasting impact on your country. And fortunately for Kosovo, the decisions have been those that have always put the institutions in the country in first place. So I actually come out of this actually very encouraged about the future.
But wouldn't you say the other side of the coin is that there would have been more dignity if in the first place the president would have vacated the post of head of LDK?
Well, I think that at the time the decisions were made about how to structure the nation, this was before I was here, okay, so I'm only reporting what I've heard, people operated in good faith and on the basis of goodwill. The people believed at the time that this was an arrangement that would respect the will of the Constitution. Again, unprecedented. We didn't know anything about the future of Kosovo at that time, what the how this was going to work. Subsequently, the court looked at it. It found that those arrangements were not appropriate. They didn't accord with the terms of the Constitution. So again, for me, this is actually proof that the system here works. Nobody acted in ill faith in this process from the very beginning. And although the president has said that he did not agree with the decision of the court, again, I think he deserves enormous credit for respecting that. And that's a legacy. That's a legacy that will live long into the future for Kosovo.
Do you agree with the decisions of the court?
It's not for me to agree or disagree. It's for me and everybody else to respect them.
Yes, but when you say, I know you haven't been here at the time when he made that decision to hold two posts, but couldn't international community encourage him to act lawfully before he had to resign as a president?
Look, the president had good legal arguments, legislative history of how we got to where we were, the drafting process of the Constitution. I think his point of view deserved a fair hearing in the court, just like the other sides did. It's not for the international community to say what was in accordance with the law of Kosovo or not. That's the proper role of the court. So I think that this process unfolded exactly the way it should have. It's a textbook example of how this should be done. Not outside interference, not political interference, just the court studying the law, making a decision, and then everybody respecting that.
But it's not quite how we wanted our textbook Kosovo post-war future to be like. If you don't mind me saying, if we look at the history of two post-war presidents, it would be a bit rough to say, but one had to die to vacate the post. The second president we've had in the post-war Kosovo, the second had to resign. Does Kosovo have to have these abnormal transitions of power, or can we look forward to actually normal transitions of power?
Well, unfortunately, death in office is one of the normal means of change. I mean, I'm not defending it, but it happens all the time. It's happened in my country 5 or 6 times in our history. What's important here is that the institutional structures have proven themselves capable of handling that kind of unexpected change. Obviously, we want to see the normal process of transfer of authority from one leader to another take place. The events of the last days have shown me that that's going to happen in the future, and we can have great confidence that it will.
Okay, let's talk about transfer of the authority. What next?
Well, again, first, the institutions are functioning. The process foreseen has taken place. There is an acting president. He can be acting for 6 months. I believe now we're in a period where the political parties are going to have to meet, to talk, and to decide on what the best way forward is. The views of all the parties need to be heard. I believe that the acting president has already indicated he intends to consult with all the parties represented in Parliament and decide upon a course of action.
But all this may take time, Ambassador,
Sure.
and we are in front of big decisions where do you really suggest that the PDK can go ahead with talks with Serbia with two heads of state being PDK?
I have not suggested that they should. The Prime Minister has made it clear that he does not believe that is the correct basis for moving forward with talks right now. That, in fact, as a de facto interim arrangement where we find ourselves in at the moment with an acting president.
But we have EU on our back,
yes,
right?
Let me finish.
Okay.
We need to clarify the local internal political arrangements before Kosovo can go to the negotiating table with a clear mandate that represents the will of the whole people. Yes, there is anxiety from Brussels to move forward quickly, but I think that the European leadership understands that when you face unexpected political developments of this nature, those have to be rectified before you can rush forward on any old basis to sit down to talk just for talk's sake.
So do you think if it takes 6 months for us maybe to have new elections, maybe get a new government, do you think the EU is ready to wait?
I'm not sure the EU has a choice in this matter. Kosovo has its own national interests. Its national interests include having a government capable of representing the will of the people, that has a mandate from the people through its parliament. It doesn't serve Europe's interest, it doesn't serve Belgrade's interest, and certainly not Kosovo's interest to rush forward for talks when the country is not ready for them. It's not in the condition to hold those successfully. Let's just hypothesize for a minute. Suppose the talks started tomorrow. Suppose there are elections in 3 or 4 months, and we get a new government where the PDK is not in the lead. What do these talks of the past few months represent in that case on this interim basis? So I think it's much better to approach this calmly, in an orderly way, get the governing institutions here in place correctly, make sure that the government has a clear mandate from its people as to what the negotiations are about, that it has the support of the people for entering that process, that the talks themselves do not become a political football in any kind of election campaign. And at the right time, the process will unfold, and I'm sure ultimately will lead to some successes.
Last time, it's incredible because last time you were here on the last interview, you were saying this year is not good for elections. We've lost so much time. I remember we were talking, we lost so much time with elections. There are so many processes waiting ahead, right. Privatization, few of them, one of them. So now, are we in a position where you say in order to get the processes going, which you were talking about then, we need elections as soon as possible? Is that what you're saying? I
think that unexpected developments change the political landscape. Certainly, this is, if not an unexpected development, certainly a development which has changed the landscape. Altered circumstances may require altered calculations. Elections may be the best way forward for Kosovo now. I would not have said that a week ago, even, before the court's decision was handed out. Now it looks different. Having been present in Kosovo in last elections, how long do you think Kosovo needs to prepare administratively for new elections? That's difficult to say. Of course, we're starting, everybody's sort of caught flat-footed by this. So clearly it's going to take... Everybody, really? I think so. I think it's certainly the Electoral Commission is. So it's going to take, you know, a couple of oppositional voices who have been asking for this for a while have not been caught. Well, I hope they're ready then. If we do go to new elections, I hope they're ready to begin their campaigns right away. No doubt if they've been calling for elections, they've been preparing for them. So do you think now Kosovo is stable to allow democracy and debate to flourish in the state that we are now? Absolutely. In fact, now more than ever. Now is when debate and democracy need to flourish, exactly at these times. Can we talk about privatization for a bit? Because I want to link it with, you say we need to approach this calmly and slowly and wait for the dialogue. Do you wait for the dialogue with Serbia? Would you have the same attitude about privatization too? The privatization processes, there are several, have begun. They are on an orderly track. There is no rushing them forward. None of them are due for completion for more than 6 months from now. In fact, that would be fast. So I think there's plenty of time to let the processes unfold. This is a matter of a lot of legal work, due diligence from interested bidders, researching the potentials of the company, their balance sheets, all those things. There's plenty of time for all that technical work to go on. And there will be a new government of one kind or another in place, I'm certain, before any of these processes are ready for decisions. That government, whatever government it is, will have a mandate to govern and can make the appropriate decisions at the right time.
What's the time scale, particularly on PTK? People who are watching this would be interested to know, what is the time scale we're talking about regarding the PTK?
I'm not the right person to ask. I'm not an expert on the privatization transactions, and we're not providing direct advice to the government on this transaction. I believe that just yesterday, the pre-qualification applications were due. Now there is a period of several months in which the pre-qualified companies will do their research. So we're looking at, I don't want to put a definite time on it because I don't want that to become a fact when I would misspeak, but certainly not less than 6 months, and I'm fairly confident longer than that.
What would you say to the critics who say that we are selling the PTK at a time when it is clear we are too desperate for funds for the highway, to pay for the highway, and this makes the buyers go for the lowest payment?
I'd say that they have an erroneous conception of how this works. First, the market will set the price. There are 4 or 5, I understand, qualified bidders now. The competition amongst them is what's going to determine the price, not the anxiety of the government. And in the interim, the government has taken a series of important decisions which are designed to maximize the value of the asset for the people of Kosovo. To defer unnecessary new billing systems is just one example. So a whole bunch of decisions have been taken that will, in fact, maximize the value of it, and the market will determine what the worth is. At that point, the government can decide this offer is sufficient, or it can decide not to move forward. Again, we won't know until we actually see what the bids are.
Are you, if for Kosovo it is interested to have the funds to pay for the highway sooner rather than later, should we sell for any cost?
No, of course not. The work on the highway, which has made amazing progress, if you haven't been down there, I urge you to go see it. It's really spectacular. The progress has been made since April. The money for the first phase of the highway, the first 22 kilometers to Prizren, is available. Doesn't require the PTK transaction to pay for it this year.
Is it true that in order to make sure the process of PTK privatization is going well, you have encouraged another, not transaction, but strategic advisors in order to make sure that the process is going well?
The government needed a strategic advisor to, as the name implies, give it strategic advice, yes.
Okay. What about when we talk about privatization, the highway, the contract about the highway, which you praised that the work is going ahead so quickly, why can't we then have a transparent contract? The contract is, nobody has seen that contract, where half of the Kosovo's yearly budget, 700 million, is going there, and we yet haven't seen how that contract looks like.
You have to ask the government why the contract's not available. I'm sure there's nothing in the contract that needs to be kept out of sight.
But you were the guarantor, Ambassador. You were seen on TV shaking hands, getting the process going. Why can't you insist on transparency on that? We have asked the government, and they say they will not make it public.
The government, the companies involved, have legal rights to contract arrangements between themselves, and you have to address them, not me.
But do you realize 40% of the budget that's going to Bechtel Enka is going to be given to private companies? They're going to subcontract the work to private companies.
And thousands of Kosovars are employed now who are learning modern construction techniques, how you build a road.
Can we know? But
hopefully that kind of knowledge is going to be transferred to your workforce. It's going to do a better job of building highways in the future.
But that is happening outside the normal tender transparent processes. We don't know where is that.
That's not correct. It was a normal transaction. Whether all the contracts are always made available for public scrutiny, I don't know. But you're trying to imply that there's something hidden by this, and there's nothing hidden about it. The costs.
How do we know? Why isn't it open then? We don't know who Bertelenka gives the contracts to.
Go ask your legal people that question. Yet I can't answer why contracts are shared or not shared in Kosovo. I'm not a Kosovar lawyer.
But would you, out of principle, would you say that it should be transparent, it should be open?
I have no problem with the way the transaction was conducted. I think it was transparent and fair. It was the most transparent process we've seen in Kosovo so far, except perhaps the airport transaction. And if I were one of the parties to the agreement, I would have nothing to hide. I'm not a party to the agreement, so I can't speak for them.
But if this was the U.S., would this go through if the budget was so big, would this go through the Senate and committees and maybe the House?
No.
No?
No.
Half of the government's budget going into a big
Well, you make
project?
it sound like half the government budget in a single year is being spent on the highway. Of course, that's not true. In any case, no. I mean, these are not matters that go through the Senate and the House this way in my country, which is just not the right question. Municipal assemblies, state governments, yes, it's a different system.
Let's go back to the dialogue with Serbia, which is the nearest challenge. Basically, you clarified in the statement you made that you think that territorial integrity of Kosovo should not be a matter of discussion in these talks.
Absolutely not.
Can you again explain to us whether the issue of North is up for discussion? Especially, I'm asking this under the calls of some other European countries who are saying that even the issue of the North should be up for discussion.
The North is a part of Kosovo. It cannot be split off from Kosovo. To the extent these talks concern arrangements that will be made concerning the whole of Kosovo, of course the North is a part of these talks. Should there be negotiations about special arrangements for the North that make it somehow different or unique, or in some way distance it from the rest of Kosovo? No, then the North should not be included in that sense. I hope that's clear enough to make, when we talk about the North being a part of it, it means if we, let's just say, take a technical issue, agree that, you know, the citizens of neither country need to have passports to cross the border at any border crossing. That applies in the North as well as in the South, where your country borders Serbia. So when we talk about the North being included, we mean that, the same arrangements that apply everywhere in the national territory, not special arrangements concerning only the North that give it some kind of special standing.
Can I ask you, why negotiate? What is in the interest of Kosovars to negotiate with Serbia at all at this stage if basic standards of freedom of movement have not been met? Serbia blocks Kosovo in CEFTA, it blocks its people, it blocks its vehicles, it blocks its goods. Why on earth is it in our interest to talk before they fulfill these obligations? Because
those are the very issues that need to be resolved. You can sit back and say, we're not going to talk about those, and, you know, someday when Serbia is ready, it'll wake up one morning and fix all those problems. Or you can enter into a process to try and fix them now, in which this is not just left to Serbia to do it out of its own goodwill, but where you can actually negotiate and win things that your country wants as well in this process.
Yeah, but what's in it for them? They want the North. It's clear. They want the North, and we want some basic things like freedom of movement. How do we let go at all?
They want more than that. And yeah, the president of Serbia has discussed partition openly in public many times, so yes. I don't dispute your characterization of one of their goals. They also want cross-border police law enforcement cooperation. They, for their own European ambitions, have a need to make sure that their border is under control in order to qualify for their own membership in Europe. That means having some understandings with Kosovo about cross-border cooperation. Security of documents, border crossing points, customs arrangements. So while they may have one large overriding political objective they define, and which we have defined as out of bounds in these talks, there are any number of other issues in which both sides have a common interest in finding some solutions. You're neighboring countries, after all. You're going to be living next to each other forever. There are arrangements that need to be made workable for the benefit of both countries. And so there is common ground there.
I would go back from these big topics, just go back in the beginning for the end, the topic we started with. Last time you were in the show, you were promoting new ideas and new people to come into, even within these political parties. What has happened with LDK in particular is that the oldest party in Kosovo that has been at least talking about reforming has now got a leader which has decided that he will rather stick as the head of a party rather than head of the state. So it means there's no space in that party for anybody else to take over and reform.
Oh, I'm not sure that's correct. We don't know how their leadership contest will turn out. First of all, the party will decide that. Even if the party were to decide to keep the same leadership, that doesn't mean there's not room to bring in fresh blood from below. I'm not sure that this is an all or nothing thing. Either you bring in entirely new people, replace the existing leadership, or if it's a more gradual process of internal reform and bringing new people and ideas.
But the atmosphere in that party is that they don't want to, they would rather not challenge the leader in front of elections coming to please the other competing parties.
That's their right to make those choices. It's the right of the people of Kosovo to say whether that's the party they want governing them or somebody else that has a different approach. We'll know when the elections take place, if they take place.
In the end, if it is new ideas and new visions you wanted for Kosovo last time you came in this program, could you tell me again what are these? How does this new vision look like for Kosovo, and what is the vision that American Embassy would support of Kosovo?
Well, first of all, we'll support the vision the people of Kosovo want. I should say that first. It's not my place to impose a vision on your country. Secondly, I think it's a vision that people in Kosovo probably do want. They want to see jobs and income. They want to see education for their children. They want to know that there's health care for their aged parents. These are the things that people most everywhere want, and that, frankly, are great needs in Kosovo. And I think they're looking for somebody who defines how the economy can be grown, how jobs are created, how wealth is created in this country, not just for a few people, but for everybody. And I think that's the vision that people here are hungry for, and to know where their country is going to fit into the larger international scene in the coming years. I think those are the kinds of visions I would guess that most people in this country are looking for. And again, they're the same as people everywhere in the world want for themselves and their families.
And just to compare it with a regional country, in Croatia, for example, the leadership that led the country through privatization and war was not the leadership that led the country to EU and is leading one to EU. Do you think that transition should occur in Kosovo too?
It's very dangerous to make, sort of sweeping analogies from one country to another. Because it happened this way there, the same thing should happen here in Kosovo. Leaderships evolve, they change. Leaders come and go. The people vote them in, they vote them out. I can't compare Kosovo to Croatia. I don't know Croatia. But I think the people will decide if the leadership is adequate, they'll continue with them. If it doesn't meet their needs, doesn't satisfy their expectations, they'll vote for change. This is what democracy is all about at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And in the state that LDK is today, what would you advise them as the last thing? What would you advise they should do in the position where they are at this moment?
It's not my place to give political advice to political parties competing for office. That's sort of well beyond the responsibilities of an ambassador.
They would like to know. Let's say if we would like to know.
I've defined one of the measures of success during my time here, if I have success, as reducing the instinct of people to turn to outsiders for advice. Part of growing up is learning to make your own decisions and doing it for yourself. Yeah. I'm going to hate it, but the day Kosovo tells me no, I will say is the day that I've been successful. Okay,
let's just make a scenario then. If the Prime Minister does not want to go, as you said clearly, into dialogue without the LDK, without a coalition partner, and if the second is that he will not accept an LDK president to be appointed now for the next 5 years after Saidio resigned, do you think that's a legitimate request, and do you think that should be respected?
I think it's a natural political response to say, when I have a year left in my current mandate, why would I appoint an opponent to 5 years when we can both start with new mandates, do this on the basis of partnership? So I think that's a perfectly normal, legitimate political instinct anywhere.
And if one of the parties that is now in government becomes an opposition in a future government, would you still consider it a healthy atmosphere to go into dialogue with Serbia? Or would you consider we need some national consensus, including all the oppositional leaders?
Well, this is highly speculative.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't do a lot of good to speculate on possible outcomes. I think that whoever is in power and whoever is in opposition, there are certain issues of national interest, and they're clear, okay? They are clear. I mean, Kosovo's leaders have defined them, and I don't think the people here anyway would disagree with them. Kosovo says the United States must be a part of this process. I don't think the parties in opposition would disagree with the government on that. The government has said our red lines are we won't discuss partition, we won't put at risk the territorial integrity of Kosovo, and we're not talking about autonomy in the north or arrangements like that. There are issues of national consensus that I think that transcend partisan interest, and parties, whether they're in government or out of government, whether in government today and become opposition later, I think will view these as matters of national interest and work to give the government the strongest possible unified mandate at the beginning of these talks.
Ambassador Dell, thank you very much for taking the time to come here.
Thank you, Jeta. Good to see you.
Shikues të nderuar, ishte ky ambasadori Criss Dell duke folur për zhvillimet e fundit pas dorëheqjes së presidentit Sediu.